Most people spend their entire lives waiting to feel ready, waiting for the moment when everything clicks, when the fear goes away, when the right opportunity appears, when they finally feel confident enough to start. That moment never comes. Not for the talented person, not for the intelligent person, not for the person with every apparent advantage. Because readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action, it is a condition that develops through action. And the people who understand that, who have stopped waiting for readiness and started building it, are the ones who end up with lives that the people still waiting can only observe from a distance and wonder about. This video is about why discipline beats talent, not as a motivational statement, as a structural observation about how outcomes actually get produced, about why the most talented people in almost every room are often not the most successful people in that room 10 years later, about what talent actually is, what discipline actually is, and why one compounds while the other slowly depreciates. Stay with me. Let me start with what talent actually is, because most people have a fundamentally incorrect model of it. Most people think talent is a fixed asset, something you either have or you don't, something that gives you a permanent advantage over the people who don't have it, something that shows up early, is recognized and rewarded, and continues to produce returns indefinitely. That model is wrong. Talent is a starting advantage, not a permanent one. It gives you a head start, a higher ceiling at the beginning, an easier initial path through certain kinds of challenges. But it is not self-sustaining. It does not compound on its own. It does not improve through disuse. And it depreciates when it isn't developed, when it isn't challenged, when it isn't paired with the consistent effort that turns raw capability into refined skill. Here is the thing about starting advantages. They matter enormously in the short run, and they matter less and less over longer time horizons, because in the short run, the person who starts ahead is still ahead. But over time, the person who grows faster catches up, and then passes, and keeps going, while the person with the starting advantage is still relying on the same capability they had at the beginning, slightly refined, slightly practiced, but fundamentally the same, while the disciplined person has compounded, has built layer upon layer of capability, has developed through each challenge rather than just performing through it, has become someone fundamentally different from who they were at the start, while the talented person has remained, essentially, a more polished version of who they already were. This is why talent depreciates, not because it disappears, because it stays the same while the disciplined person grows. And staying the same in a world that keeps moving is the same as falling behind. Here is what discipline actually is. Because discipline is one of the most misunderstood words in the language of self-development. Most people think discipline means forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, through willpower, through gritting your teeth, through suffering, through the discomfort of doing what you said you would do, even when every part of you wants to stop. That is a real form of discipline, but it is not the most important form, and it is not the form that produces the most significant long-term outcomes. The most important form of discipline is not forcing yourself to act. It is developing yourself into the kind of person for whom the right action is natural. There is a massive difference between those two things. Forcing yourself to act is a battle, every single time, against your own preferences, against the pull toward comfort, against the resistance that shows up whenever you approach something that requires real effort, and battles are exhausting. They deplete the resource they depend on. They get harder when you're tired, when you're stressed, when your life is complicated, when everything else is demanding your attention and your energy. The discipline that compounds, the discipline that produces outcomes over decades rather than just weeks, is the discipline of identity, of becoming the kind of person who does certain things. Not because you force yourself, but because those things are what someone like you does. Because they are expressions of who you are, rather than contradictions of who you naturally want to be. This is not a mystical concept. It is a practical process. Every time you do the hard thing when you didn't want to, you add one data point to the pattern your brain is tracking about you. And over enough data points, the pattern becomes your identity. The story you tell about yourself changes. From I am someone who sometimes pushes myself to I am someone who does hard things. From I am trying to be disciplined to I am a disciplined person. And that identity shift, subtle as it sounds, changes what is effortful and what is natural, changes what requires willpower and what is automatic, changes what you have to force yourself to do and what you just do, because it's who you are. Let me talk about the specific mechanism by which discipline beats talent. Because this is not just an inspirational observation, it is a concrete process with specific steps that play out over specific time horizons in a way that is predictable and observable. Step 1. Talent gives the talented person an easier start. They grasp things faster, perform better initially, receive more early praise and recognition, experience less struggle in the beginning. Step 2. Because things come easier, the talented person develops a weaker relationship with struggle. Less tolerance for the discomfort of not immediately understanding something. Less patience with the grinding work of building capability in areas where they don't start ahead. Less experience with the feeling of being lost and figuring their way through it because they rarely need to. Step 3. The disciplined person starts behind. Things are harder. They struggle more. They fail more often in the early stages. They spend more time in the uncomfortable territory between not understanding and understanding. But through that discomfort, they develop something the talented person isn't developing. Resilience. The specific resilience that comes from having been lost and found your way, from having failed and tried again, from having struggled with something genuinely hard and come out the other side more capable. Step 4. Both people encounter a genuinely difficult challenge, something that doesn't yield easily to either of them, something that requires sustained effort through prolonged uncertainty. The talented person, who has rarely had to sustain effort through prolonged uncertainty, finds this experience intolerable and stops sooner than they should. The disciplined person, who has built familiarity with exactly this experience, keeps going. Not because they feel better about it, because they have enough evidence from past experience to trust that sustained effort through uncertainty produces eventual clarity, and that trust, built through the accumulated experience of having pushed through before, is the resource that determines who keeps going and who doesn't. Step 5. Over time, the person who consistently keeps going compounds, while the person who consistently stops before the breakthrough stays roughly where they are. And the gap that opened at step 1, where talent was ahead, closes, and then reverses, and keeps growing in the other direction, until the disciplined person is so far ahead that the initial talent advantage seems almost irrelevant, because it was, relative to the compounding that consistency produces over years. Here is something about talent that nobody says clearly enough. Talent can be a trap, not always, not inevitably, but often, specifically for people whose talent makes things easy early, because things coming easy, before you've had to develop the deeper capabilities, creates a specific kind of fragility, a fragility to difficulty, a fragility to situations where talent alone isn't enough, where persistence matters more than initial capability, where the willingness to be bad at something for a while, before becoming good at it, is the prerequisite to becoming good at it. And the person who has always been good at things from the start has never developed that willingness, has never had to, has been able to rely on natural capability in every domain where natural capability was sufficient, and has avoided the domains where it wasn't, or underperformed in them, or explained away the underperformance as evidence that those particular things weren't really important. The talented person who has never had to struggle arrives at the inevitable difficult challenge without the resources to meet it, not because they lack intelligence, because they lack the specific kind of resilience that only gets built through having struggled and kept going, through having failed and tried again, through having been lost and found the way through. And that lack, when the difficult challenge arrives, is more limiting than almost any gap in raw capability. Let me talk about what discipline actually produces. Over time, compounded, in the domains that matter most. The first thing discipline produces is calibrated confidence, not the fragile confidence of someone who has always succeeded easily, the durable confidence of someone who has failed repeatedly and kept going, and discovered through that experience that they can handle more than they initially believed. This confidence is fundamentally different from the confidence of natural talent because it has been tested. It has been specifically stress tested by experiences that could have broken it. And it survived. And that survival is the evidence on which the confidence is built, not the absence of failure, the history of recovering from it. The second thing discipline produces is a specific kind of skill, not just the skill you were developing, but the meta skill of skill development, the ability to get good at things, the process of moving from ignorance to competence, through sustained engagement, through the uncomfortable territory of not knowing, through the specific frustration of seeing the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and continuing anyway. That meta skill, the skill of learning, is what allows everything else to compound. Because once you have it, you can apply it to any new domain. You already know the process. You've already been through the discomfort of not knowing. You already have evidence that sustained effort through uncertainty produces capability. And so every new challenge, every new domain, every new skill you need to develop is approached with the specific confidence of someone who has been through this before and knows what it produces on the other side. The third thing discipline produces is a reputation, not the reputation of being talented, the reputation of being reliable, of being someone who does what they say they will do, who shows up when it's uncomfortable to show up, who follows through when it would be easier not to, who can be counted on to deliver, not just in the easy situations, in the hard ones. That reputation, built slowly through consistent behavior over time, opens doors that talent alone cannot open, because the people who are building significant things need people they can count on, not just people who are impressive, people who deliver consistently, regardless of circumstances. And that is not a quality that talent provides. It is a quality that discipline builds over time, through the accumulated evidence of having shown up when it was hard. Here is the hardest truth about this. Discipline is not something you decide to have. It is something you build, incrementally, through specific choices, made repeatedly, over long periods. And it starts smaller than most people think. It does not start with the grand gesture, the dramatic commitment, the public announcement of transformation. It starts with the next small thing, the thing that needs to be done today, that you would prefer not to do, that has no immediate reward for being done, and significant invisible cost for being avoided. Doing that thing, when you don't want to, when it would be easy to justify not doing it, when nobody would know the difference, that is the beginning of discipline. Not the discipline that announces itself, the discipline that quietly does what needs to be done, when there is no audience, when there is no reward, when the only thing that knows whether you did it is you. And the accumulation of those private moments, the moments where you kept your commitment to yourself when nobody was watching, is what builds the identity, the story, the evidence that you are someone who does hard things, not someone who talks about doing hard things, or plans to do hard things, or intends to do hard things when the right moment arrives. Someone who does them, now, regardless of how ready you feel, regardless of how inspired you are, regardless of whether the conditions are perfect. Someone who does the thing and then does it again and again, until doing it becomes who you are. Here is where I want to leave you. Talent is real. It provides real advantages in specific contexts, over specific time horizons. I am not arguing against it. But talent without discipline is a resource that doesn't compound, that doesn't develop into its fullest expression, that stays roughly what it was at the start, slightly polished, slightly refined, but fundamentally the same. While the disciplined person keeps becoming someone different, someone more capable, someone with more options, someone whose trajectory keeps moving upward, while the talented person's trajectory levels off, because one of them is compounding, and one of them isn't. The most successful people I have observed, over long enough time horizons, are almost never the most talented people at the start. They are the people who showed up most consistently, who did the work when it wasn't rewarding, who kept going when the evidence for stopping was overwhelming, who treated every obstacle as a problem to solve rather than a reason to stop, and who built, over years of consistent unglamorous effort, a version of themselves that raw talent never produced. Because raw talent never had to. The question is not whether you are talented enough. The question is whether you are willing to be consistent enough, long enough, through enough discomfort, to let discipline do what talent cannot. Build something that compounds. Build someone who compounds. Build a life that reflects not what you were capable of at the start, but what you became through the sustained choice to keep going. That choice is available to you right now. Not when you feel more ready, not when the circumstances are better now, and every day after, until it stops being a choice and becomes who you are.